I usually always ask our students about one question, and this is question about what was the purpose of the sanctuary. So it looks like before that moment, before Exodus 25, God didn't tell anything about tabernacle. But in Exodus 25 and verse 8, he suddenly says to Moses, let them build a tabernacle for me, so I may dwell in their midst. Or let them build a sanctuary for me, that I will dwell in their midst. So what was the purpose of the sanctuary if before it has never been mentioned? Furthermore, if we read the covenant code, these are chapters Exodus 21 to 23. In those chapters, we cannot find any reference to the sanctuary, to the tabernacle. And furthermore, we can see that in the chapter 24, when Moses is going to God, God called Moses not to give him instructions about the sanctuary, but he called Moses to give him the 10 commandments, but not the sanctuary. But when Moses came up to the mountain, God, for some reason, told him, okay, now let them build a tabernacle for me. And this is a question. So what was the purpose of the sanctuary, and why was it needed? What do you think?
Well,
yes,
excuse me, sir.
Yes.
From the text, the purpose of the sanctuary was for God to dwell amongst them.
Yeah, correct. Okay, correct, very good. So the purpose of the sanctuary was for God to dwell among them. But do you see, God dwelled with the patriarchs, but he never asked them to build a sanctuary. So what was the need of the sanctuary at this particular moment? Yes, Pastor Usudankwa.
Yeah, Prof, if we taking a cue from the beginning when God created Adam and Eve, and he had fellowship with them, he walking in their midst and the rest. Then I look at the sanctuary more as God being much more closer to us than he was before. Mm-hmm. Not that he was not close to them. If we look at the patriarchs, it was only you are looking at individuals then. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you're looking at a multitude of people. And God instituting this to me was a way that he will be close to each of them individually. Mm-hmm. And then another way also, so that somehow they could feel his presence much more than they might have felt before. Okay. That is my thing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Pastor Daniel Tunga.
Yes, sir. I would like to contribute by saying that I believe the children of Israel have spent about more than 4 centuries in Egypt, and they are lost sight of the image of their God. Mm-hmm. And by pitching a tabernacle, God was to reveal himself to them as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I believe God really wanted to refresh their minds and tell them, remind them of all the promises that he had made in from the beginning to their their forefathers, so that they will come to know him personally and be saved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions. I just want to add something to our discussion. So, in this regard, it's very important to go back to the book of Genesis, to chapter 28. Do you remember in this chapter, Jacob is going away from his home, and on the way to Haran, he saw in a dream God. And he saw the ladder that going up to heaven. So I don't want to go very deep in the analysis of this chapter, but what is interesting and important here, Jacob, when he woke up, do you remember what he said? This is the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And he promised to build an altar at this place and give the tithe from everything that he has. So now I just want to pay your attention to some words. He called the name of that place Bethel, and Bethel is translated as house of God. So do you see, he says this is the house of God, but there was no any house, any structure there. Furthermore, he didn't want to build anything here except the altar. So what he has done later on, he built just an altar and that's all. But it was a house of God. So it was a kind of a sanctuary at that time. And what is also interesting when we analyze this chapter, so it is called the place, the word place. So he came to the place is used with the is used with an article, and it means that this place was known to the people and known to the author at least. And we can see the same place, Abraham many years ago also pitched his tent and worshipped God. So what we can see a kind of a paradigm of the worship of patriarchs. So what happened? What saw Jacob when he had a dream? So what did he see in the dream? He saw a ladder that going up to heaven. And what was at the top of the ladder? Why did he say this is the gates of heaven and this is the house of the Lord? What did he see at the top of the ladder?
He saw God.
Okay, good. He saw God. And
angels coming down and
yes, of
going up.
course. Yes, angels were coming up and down. It's true. But what is the most important? He saw God at the very top of the ladder. And do you see, we can find here a paradigm how the patriarchs were worshiping God. So do you see, they never built sanctuaries. They never built any kind of structure. What they did, they only built the altars in many different places. But when they built the altars, at that place where they built the altars, there was a kind of a connection between heaven and the earth, And when they built an altar, it looks like a heavenly temple, or I don't know how to say, God's presence was coming down to that place. And we can say that when they built an altar, it was an altar that connected the heaven and the earth. So Jacob said, this is the gates of heaven. So this is like an entrance to heaven. And most probably what he saw, because do you see, many people say, many researchers say that the structure that he saw, this ladder that's coming up, is very similar to Mesopotamian ziggurats. And do you know what ziggurats were? Ziggurats were, we can say, the temples. So there are ladder and it goes up, and at the top of the ziggurat there was a temple. So it looks like when the patriarchs worshiped God, so when they built an altar on the earth, it was this was a place that connected the earth with the heaven and connected them with the heavenly sanctuary. And so patriarchs continued to worship God like this. And when we go to the Mount Sinai, you can see that Mount Sinai is also built in a similar way. So it looks like also we have an altar here, and in the dream, Jacob had a ladder. But by the way, the word that is used here, ladder, is hapax legomenon, so it means that it occurs in the Bible only one time, and that is why it's very difficult to understand the meaning of this word. Some people say that it was a kind of a rampant, or it was a kind of like a not elevator, but something that coming up to heaven. Yes, and something similar we can find here at Mount Sinai. So do you see we have altar, we have not a ladder, but something that is leading up, and at the top, Jacob saw God, and Moses also saw God. So this is like antitype of the sanctuary, what we can see later on. And it looks like patriarchs were worshiping God like this. And what is important, when they built altars, it was the same as worshiping in the heavenly sanctuary, because they were connected directly to the presence of God, and they were connected to the heavenly sanctuary. And do you remember I told you that we cannot find any reference to the sanctuary or the tabernacle before Exodus 25 and verse 8. So it looks like God was satisfied with this kind of worship, and I believe it is very good. Do you see, people worship God not in the earthly sanctuary, but they worship God in the heavenly sanctuary. But now at this particular moment, God said, "Let them build me a sanctuary. Let them build me a tabernacle." So I need a tabernacle. And I have a question: why does God need a tabernacle at this particular moment? So why did he want to live in the tabernacle, but not at the top of the mountain or in some other way? So the worship of the patriarchs was normal, no problem with that. Furthermore, do you see what we have here? Do you remember during our first lecture I mentioned about altar that is mentioned in Exodus chapter 20? And do you remember that the liberal scholars, they use this argument as use this fact as an argument for different sources? So they say, okay, this altar that is described in Exodus chapter 20 is like an old passage, and it reflects the primitive religion. And after that, we have another altar in the sanctuary, in the tabernacle, and this is already advanced religion or sophisticated religion. But I believe we have a different explanation and very simple explanation. So what we can see here, it looks like the original plan of God was to have the same worship as during the time of patriarchs, so that people can worship God, and they can worship when they build altar. They worship directly in the presence of heavenly temple. They can go to heavenly temple by this worship. But at this moment, God wanted to change something. Yes, Pastor Ephraim.
Okay, sorry, sir. I want to give my own thoughts to it. The primitive religion the patriarchs had was a kind of direct communication with the Lord.
So I wouldn't say that this is a primitive religion, because do you see, it is like a direct communication with God. So what is better?
Pardon?
What can be better than the direct communication with God?
I think there won't be anyone that is better than that. But the particular problem with the children of Israel when they left Egypt at Mount Sinai, when God called them to the mountain to commune with them, you know, the people cried to God. They said that God should speak to Moses, and Moses would speak to them.
Okay.
They were afraid of coming to meet the Lord face to face. And I remember there was a text that said that God wouldn't like to destroy them because they were a stiff-necked people.
Yes, in chapter 33.
God coming among them, he will likely destroy them. And so probably the sanctuary was a better option, so that the presence of the Lord will be there. They will go in there and make all the rituals of worship instead of a direct communication with the Lord, and eventually God might have destroyed them.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pastor Ephraim. So I agree completely with you, and I believe that you are right. So now let us go back to this interesting detail about the reaction of people to the theophany. So what we can find in, for example, Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 to 19 is a kind of a theophany, when God manifested himself. And we see in chapter 20 of the book of Exodus that the reaction of the people on this theophany was negative. So they were afraid. They were not able to stand in the presence of God. Later on in chapter 24, we can see, and what is important, Moses as author emphasizes this idea. And he says that 70 elders with Moses came up to the mountain, and they were in the presence of God. And what is important, how it is emphasized here, verse 10, and they saw the God of Israel. Beneath his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as clear as the sky itself. God did not harm the Israelite nobles. They saw him and they ate and drank. So do you see this emphasis that he didn't harm them? It means actually that it is possible to be in the presence of God, like those 70 elders experienced, and to be alive. So it's not something it's extraordinary, but it is not something harmful. It is not anything dangerous to come to the presence of God. So we can see that it is possible to be in the presence of God. But when we look at the end of chapter 24, and this is verse 17, and this verse says, the appearance of the Lord's glory to the Israelites was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. So Moses is going to God to get 10 commandments, but this theophany, the appearance of God for the people, is like a consuming fire. And this expression, consuming fire, is always negative. So every time when we have this expression, it always occurs in the negative context. So it means that people are still afraid of the presence of God. And as a response to that, God said, okay, I want to live among the people. I want to live among the Israelites, but they cannot be present. So they cannot withstand my presence. So that they are afraid of me. So in this case, let them build me a sanctuary, a tabernacle, and my presence will be hidden from them. So I will hide from them behind the curtains, so that in this case, I may dwell among them. Yes, Pastor Chipulu.
Prof, thank you very much. This is a very important subject matter, because it's here where we see our church, where the foundation and the very fundamental principle that we embrace as Seventh-day Adventist Church. I want to find out from you, Prof, since the pronouncement that I may dwell among you were made in the wilderness when God mentioned that they needed to erect a sanctuary. But we see the sanctuary services way back during the patriarchal time. Does it mean before the pronouncement in the wilderness, God was never dwelling among his people, as evidenced during the time of Abraham, who used to go to the mountain to sacrifice? We could see the same culture in Isaac, in Jacob, but there were no such pronouncements that I am dwelling with you, Abraham. The first time we see those statements, it's in the wilderness. Does it mean God was not dwelling among the patriarchs that time?
No, I don't think so. On the contrary, I can see that the patriarchs were able, as the previous speaker said, Pastor Ephraim said that the patriarchs were able to communicate directly with God. So it means that he dwelt with the patriarchs even more closer than during the time of tabernacle. So everybody of the patriarchs, do remember, Abraham was communicating with God directly. God told him, go out of the tent. He went out of the tent, and God told him, look at the sky. So do you see how many stars? You will have as many descendants as the stars on the sky. So God was talking to Abraham directly. And I believe this is the best way. So what does it mean to dwell? I believe that dwelling is just not just being some invisible in an invisible way, but the dwelling is much more. It is much more than that. It is just a communication with the patriarchs, and all the patriarchs as well. Do you see? They had dreams. They had the presence of God in their midst. So I don't want to say that God didn't dwell with the patriarchs. Yeah. Okay. Lotibanda. Pastor Lutibanda.
Thank you, Prof. I am following this from the intention of God in the Garden of Eden, where we saw that Eden was a form of a sanctuary. This has been the idea of God all this time, where with man. And when we get to the patriarchs, God appears to them on an individual basis. As we get to the children of Israel, God is establishing a nation. And in this case, he cannot just continue communicating with Moses, because the idea is that he has a people now. And so, excuse me, when God talked about a sanctuary that he may dwell, it's the same idea that he has been having with Moses, but now he wants to have a relationship with each one of them. And like you have observed, of course, that we are scared of him. The sanctuary is a way of removing the fear that they had of God, but now they can talk to God. I think this is the picture of God from the time of Genesis, from Eden until the time of the end.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so most probably the purpose of building the sanctuary was exactly to, as you said, to remove this fear, or to make possible God's dwelling among the people who are afraid of this, of the theophany, of the sight, how he looks like. And this is important issue. So here we have Exodus 24:17. So the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire, a consuming fire. And as I said, consuming fire has negative connotations. And the scene is very similar to the scene of Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 to 22. The role of the sanctuary is to make possible the presence of God among his people. Also, the covenant has already been made. The people show that they are not ready to be in the presence of God. The glory of God continues to be terrible for them. And God decides to be present among his people. That is why the Lord clothes his glory with or hides his glory with the skins of animals. And now we have the instructions for building a sanctuary. And this is from chapter 25 and up to chapter 31. And in the end of chapter 31, we have that Moses got the tablets of the law, and he is coming back. But Moses was absent for 40 days, and during those 40 days, the sin of the golden calf was committed. Okay, so when we speak about the sin of the golden calf, it is a very interesting topic. And we can see again this verb to see. When people saw, yeah, and do you remember that this verb to see very often connects somehow to the sin. And when they saw that Moses didn't come back, so they asked Aaron to make a calf, and Aaron made a calf, and they started worshiping the calf. So I just want to tell you that this story about the golden calf is a little bit controversial story, because you can find different interpretation of the meaning of the golden calf. And when I studied this topic, it was interesting. I discovered that actually until the 2nd century AD, even all the Jewish rabbinic sources agree that the golden calf was one of the most the grievous sin that the Israelites did in the history. And there is an expression even that every generation of the Israelites suffers because of the sin of the golden calf. But after the 2nd century, we can see that the rhetoric has changed, and rabbis tried to find a way how to whitewash Aaron and the Israelites in this incident. And it can be explained because at that time, Judeo-Christian relationship are not broken, but a little bit spoiled, and even broken. We can say that they are even broken. And the problem is that anti-Semitism also started at that time, and Christians usually accuse the Jews in two sins. And the first sin is, of course, that they crucified Jesus. And another sin is that they committed a sin of the golden calf. So these two sins were like constant rebukes from Christians to the Jews. And that is why Jews try to, or Israelites or Jewish rabbis try to find a way how they can somehow not justify, but to make this sin milder, not as grief as it is described in this passage. And what they say, they usually say that actually what Aaron did, it was not the God, so they didn't want to make a God, but they made a kind of a pedestal for God's glory. So the golden calf was a kind of a pedestal of God's glory, and they didn't want to make a calf. And this explanation is very, very popular until now. So even in some very serious commentaries, you can find this kind of idea. So that is why I just want you to know about that. But the Bible, on the other hand, if you read the Bible, we can see that the Bible emphasizes that it was a very, very serious sin. And by the way, one more interesting thing that I would like to tell you about the Jewish exegesis. Of course, I already made you several examples of rabbis' exegesis, and this exegesis was not always reliable, or it doesn't sound well in all the cases. But sometimes we see they can make a very interesting point, and sometimes they notice some details, and they pay attention to the details, and this attention is very, very is good, and it can help us to understand the passage better. So, for example, the rabbis pay attention to this expression, chapter 32, and we read verse 5. When Aaron saw, and my Bible says, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it and made an announcement. There will be a festival to the Lord tomorrow. But in fact, in Hebrew language, there is no word this. And in the Hebrew, we can just read, when Aaron saw. When Aaron saw, he built an altar. And rabbis, and this is a good example of rabbinic interpretation, rabbis ask themselves, what did he see? And usually when they don't have answer in the Bible, what they do, they try to make up something to fill this gap in the narrative. And I just want to pay attention to, and they paid attention to another detail. So do you see, when Moses went up to the mountain, he left 2 people to take care of the Israelites. Do you remember who were supposed to be leaders while Moses is absent?
Aaron and Joshua.
Aaron.
No, Joshua went with Moses. Joshua
Aaron
always went. Aaron, and who was the second one?
and Oh.
Who?
Oh.
Aaron and Hur.
Yes, correct. Aaron and
Har.
what is the correct pronunciation? Hur or Har? Har.
Hur.
Okay, it doesn't matter. So this was the man who was holding the hands of Moses together with Aaron when Joshua, do you remember in chapter 17 of the book of Exodus, when he had a battle. And what is surprising, chapter 24 of the book of Exodus is the last place where this person is mentioned. It is the last place where this person is mentioned. So he just disappeared from the narrative, and he has not been mentioned anymore in the Hebrew Bible. So the rabbis ask themselves a question: what did happen to this man, Har or Hur? And of course, there is no answer in the Bible, so they made up a story about that. And this story sounds quite reasonable. So they said like this: so in the beginning, those people of Israel came to Hur or Har and asked him, so please build a golden calf for us. And he said, no, I will not do this. So what they did, they killed him. So they killed him, and they came to Aaron and told him, please build the golden calf for us. And Aaron thought to himself, okay, if I build if I refuse, So what they do, they will kill me. But I am a future high priest, and if they kill their high priest, it will be a great sin. So that is why he decided to agree, and he started building the golden calf. According to another Jewish tradition, they say like this, so that Aaron, when they came and told him, build for us a golden calf. By the way, and how they explain when Aaron saw. When Aaron saw, it means he saw that Hur or Har was killed. So, and after that, he started building the golden calf. So according to another tradition, Aaron thought to himself, okay, if somebody else will do this, he will make it very quickly. But I can just take time and I can delay building the golden calf, and maybe Moses comes back, and I will not be able to finish it until he comes back. So another explanation how they wanted to whitewash the reputation of Aaron, because he is the high priest, and can you imagine the high priest made the golden calf and actually was the one who introduced the golden calf to the people. But all these explanations, I mean, the explanation about Hur or Har, it looks even logical. But the Bible, what is important for us to remember, the Bible really emphasizes that this was a great sin. And I just want you to pay attention to those parallels. Oh, not just let us skip this. Yes, to this. So what we can see, we can find parallels between Exodus chapter 24 and Exodus chapter 32. For example, Moses built an altar and Aaron built an altar. Moses woke up early to bring the offerings, and people woke up early to bring offerings. Moses brought burnt offering and peace offering, and people also brought burnt offering and a peace offering. Moses calls to people and Aaron calls to people. 70 elders ate and drank, and all people ate and drank. 70 elders worshipped God, but, sorry, mistake here. People worshipped the golden calf. So what all those parallels can tell us? What is the nature of the event that took place and is described in Exodus chapter 32?
Prof, will it be, it's a sin of worship?
Okay.
It's a sin of worship, but
yes.
For me, it might be more identical to what they were seeing back in Egypt. Because like you said, if there were issues of burnt offering, there were issues of offering, then there was the drinking as well. The issue of the drinking, I don't know whether it takes our mind back to a covenant or an agreement or something, but for me, it's more like it's more like a worship time, because like if analysts worship, so there were a lot of activities they did in the course of the worship.
Somebody says, I see apostasy here. Of course, this is apostasy. But we need... Okay, Pastor Vosudanko, I cannot hear you well. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, okay, Pastor Peter Magaki, I see you raise up your hand.
Yeah, Prof, the comparison between the Exodus 24 and Exodus 32. Here we find that Aaron now is introducing, or the scene where Aaron is introducing the golden calf worship. It marks the beginning of when the Israelites now will begin to have a counterfeit worship other than the ideal that God had planned the children of Israel to have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So one more thing that I would like to remind you. What did happen in Exodus 24? So what does this chapter describe? Exodus 24.
Exodus 24 explains the ideal worship where everything was done according to God's instruction.
But it is more than just an ideal worship.
Yes.
It's the affirmation of the covenant.
Correct. So
So
what
the
happened in
covenant
Exodus?
affirmation?
Yes, correct. What happened in Exodus 24? It was a ritual of the covenant.
Yeah.
So in this case, what happened in Exodus 32? Aaron imitates Moses. Okay, Moses built an altar. Aaron did the same. Moses brought burnt offering and peace offering. Aaron did the same. After that, we can see that 70 elders ate and drank. And do you remember I mentioned that very often covenant was ended up with this party when they eat together. And 70 elders ate and drank. It was a covenant. And all people also ate and drank. So what does it mean?
Was that a covenant affirmation?
Yes, it was a covenant, but with whom?
Not with God, certainly.
Of course, with whom?
With
the
man.
the golden
calf.
With the golden calf. So do you see, it was because they said, these are your God that brought you out of Egypt. So Exodus 32, it was not just like an idol worship. Of course, idol worship is very bad, but it is even more than the idol worship. It was a ritual of the covenant with an idol. So it looks like people forgot the covenant with God and broke this covenant completely. And now they want to enter into the covenant with this piece of gold. Okay, Pastor Miro.
Yes, thank you, Prof. I just wanted some clarity because now we already, as you were presenting, we saw that Moses was, okay, he went for the commandments, but when he got there, then God also added something to do with the covenant. And so as he comes, he finds these people on another business, okay, another kind of worship. And so he's angered and throws down the tablets and they are broken in two. So now the issue of covenant now being broken at this point, I just wanted some clarity from you, since they had not got it, Moses was coming with it. Have you gotten my question, Professor?
So not clearly. So can you just emphasize it again?
I was saying, like you already hinted, when Moses went for the laws, he comes back also with the covenant.
Yeah, covenant with the tablets of the covenant.
So
yes.
as he comes back, he finds these people on another lane of worship.
And he broke
having idols. So he's angered and throws down the tablets, and then they are broken, and the rest comes history. So I was saying it was like now, yes, he entered the covenant with God on their behalf. But now these people, before they knew it, it was already there. So they were waiting to receive it. So how do we relate what
Okay.
now you have just said, that
Yes.
there is an issue to do with the covenant being broken at this point.
Yes, yes. So the covenant is broken. And what Moses did, he also breaks the covenant from the point of God. Because in this case, of course, it's difficult to say, but anyway, so it looks like the covenant is completely broken from both sides. And it is also clearly seen from what God is speaking. So do you see here what is interesting? For the first time, what God says, your people whom you brought out from the land of Egypt. So do you see before what people said? Moses, who brought us out from the land of Egypt, again, so they are blind, they're spiritually blind. They cannot see God behind all those events. So they see this was Moses who brought us out from the land of Egypt. And from this point and on, God called people like your people. It is not my people anymore. So do you remember chapter 19 of the book of Exodus? You will be my people. But he says, no, you are not my people anymore. You are the people of Moses. So I believe that the fact that the tablets were broken, so this is the fact that the covenant was completely broken from both sides.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I saw somebody else, Pastor Hariwola, I saw you raised up your hand.
Question is, Prof, that my question is that why the Lord continued to choose Aaron after this great sin to be the high priest?
Okay, so this is a very difficult question. And do you see, God is not like people. So people most probably would never entrusted Aaron with this ministry. But God is a merciful God, and He always gives the second chance to the people. So I don't have an answer. Maybe it is just because of God's love and God's mercy. Okay. So what is important? People broke the covenant completely. The covenant is broken, and when the covenant is broken, we can see God's reaction. He said to Moses, so go away and I will destroy these people completely, and I will make a new nation from you. So do you see in this dialogue, as I said, God calls the people your people. He doesn't call my people anymore. And it is interesting that until the end of the book of Exodus, God never calls Israelites my people. God also called the people hard-hearted, Am Kaseh Oref. And this is another meaning like stiff-necked people. And this word kasher, this word actually is the same word that is used for hardening Pharaoh's heart. So do you see people, it looks like people took the place of Pharaoh in that paradigm. God wants to destroy, God's want to destroy the people completely. And we have three intercessions. Moses intercede for the people. First, he broke the tablets of the covenant, and after that, he went back to God and tried to do something. And finally, we can see that God showed Moses his glory, and there was a renewed covenant or renewal of the covenant. But we will come back to the covenant of chapter 34 a little bit later. But what I would like to emphasize here, that do you see there is something very interesting in this Moses intercession. So in the beginning, God said, I will destroy the people. But Moses immediately asked God not to do this. And he said, do you see, he uses two arguments. And argument number one, do you remember the covenant with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And so if you destroy the people, the covenant will not be fulfilled, because you promised to multiply them, not to destroy them. So he applies to the covenant with the patriarchs. And the second argument that he uses is, what would Egyptian say, or what would other people say if you destroy the people? So in this case, they will say that God was not able to bring them to the promised land. And in this case, God would be like a very weak God, not the one who can fulfill the promises that he has given. And immediately after that, God said, okay, I will not destroy them completely. So I will not destroy them completely. After that, Moses asked him again, okay, so you promised to bring us to the promised land. And God again agreed. He said, okay, I will bring them to the promised land, but I will not go with them. I will send an angel, and angel will go with them. But do you see, at this moment, it looks like Moses, in his intercession, already got everything that is possible to get. So the people are not broken. God promised to bring them to the promised land. What else does he want? Because he doesn't stop, but he continues to intercede. And he says, oh, not Lord, please go with us. If you don't go with us, it's better for us not to go anywhere. We will stay. It's better for us to stay there than to go to the promised land without you. So what does Moses want? So why does he not stop interceding, but he continues doing this? So I believe the answer is very obvious. What he wants to do, he wants to restore the covenant. He wants to restore the covenant. And finally, we can see that it looks like the covenant is restored in Exodus 34. Yes, as I said, Lot is trying to exclude the people from the covenant relationship, but Moses is very persistent on including the people in the covenant, and these are some of the examples. Depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt. And Moses say, consider too that this nation is your people. And God said, my presence will go with you, and you singular, and I will give you singular rest. So it looks like God promises something only to Moses, not to everybody else. And he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? If it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth. So we can see that God always says it is your people, but Moses said, no, it is not my people, it is your people, I and your people. And he repeats it, I and your people. So Moses wants to include people into this covenant, but God always tries to exclude them. So he wants to make a distinction between Moses and everybody else. And now when we go to chapter 34, and chapter 34 is restored covenant, but I don't think it is really restored in chapter 34. Yes, Pastor Ntunga. You want to...
Thank you, sir. So please, can you come again? How do we reconcile? Do we understand this idea of of Moses being more merciful than God in one way? Secondly, can we identify this angel that the Lord promised to Moses will go with them? Is it Jesus? And if it is Jesus, what is the difference between God going with the people and Jesus going with the people.
Thank you. Yeah, first question. Yes, I don't think that God is more merciful than the Lord. It seems to me that this was a kind of a test for Moses himself, because I don't believe that God wanted to really to destroy all the people. And even look at the promises given to the patriarchs. So Jacob made a promise about Judah, about Joseph, that they will have like kings, like shepherds among them. So if at that moment people of Israel are destroyed and only Moses alone remained, so it means that all those promises that were given to the 12 tribes of Israel through Jacob, their patriarch, so they will not be fulfilled. So that is why I believe that God didn't want, it was not his intention to destroy the people, but it was more like a test for Moses himself. And we can see that Moses, yes, he passed this test. So he really understood the character of God, and that is why he was interceding, because his intercession is really very, very bold. He is brave to contradict God, to say something contrary to what God was saying. And it is only because Moses understood that God is a merciful God. God is a gracious God. God is forgiving God. And that is why he continues to intercede. So I don't think that Moses was more merciful than God himself. And the second question is about angel. And it is true that, yeah, angel is a kind of way to hide something. Sometimes angel can mean the presence of God, and it could be Jesus or God himself. For example, in the Covenant Code in chapter 23, if I'm not mistaken, God said that I will send my angel with you, and my angel will be going before you, and he will cast away or expel all those nations who live in this land. So it will not be your task to do this, but angel will do this. And in this case, angel's presence meant the presence of the Lord. But here in this chapter, chapter 33, angel's presence means absence of the Lord. So it looks like angel here is not a divine angel, is not a divine being, but it is just an angel. And it means the absence of the Lord among the people. So that is why we cannot say that this is exactly that angel that symbolizes the presence of the Lord. Yes, Pastor Hezron, I saw you raised up your hand.
Thank you, Prof. Indeed, Moses' mercy cannot be greater than God is. But what is presented, I've been imagining if Moses were in the time of the floods, perhaps God would not have destroyed the world with the flood for his pleading. But I'm seeing these people of God and these people of Moses, you know, they keep exchanging people of God, people of my people, your people. They were a hard-hearted people. They had not yet received an encounter of understanding who really God is. Like we saw yesterday, 10 plagues passed and they had not understood who God was. Moses had had an encounter, perhaps to keep on getting to understand who God was. I'm seeing it as if God is trying to press himself so much onto people who are not at all interested in him. People who had been grounded perhaps in other beliefs and other gods, and they are not really getting to understand who is this God. And God is only merciful to keep on keeping on with them, to woo them, to bring back to understand him. But otherwise, apparently, God has no people who are interested in him, and it's only Moses who is.
Yeah, thank you very much for your notice. If we go back to the covenant of Exodus 34, so if you read most of the books or most of the commentaries, most of the theologians will tell that the covenant was restored in Exodus 34. Most of them will tell this. But I do not agree with such kind of statement. And I have several arguments to say that the covenant has not been restored in Exodus 34. And first of all, let us pay attention to the formulation, how it is formulated. For example, Exodus 34 and verse 10. No, just before it. And he said, behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people, I will do marvels. So do you see what covenant meant? In Exodus 19, God said, you will be my people. But here, when he is doing a covenant, he says, your people. Before all your people, I will do marvels, such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you, singular, are, shall see the work of the Lord. For it is an awesome that I will do with you, and this is again singular. So there is an impression that Exodus 34 is not a covenant with everybody, with all the Israelites, but this is the covenant only with Moses alone. And there are several issues, there are several facts that can be used as arguments for this statement. First of all, what are the components or elements of the covenant? So when we look at the covenant, any covenant, we can see that covenant was supposed to have a ritual. So any covenant in the ancient times, it was impossible to do it without a ritual. And in this ritual, both parties should be involved. Furthermore, we can see that during the Sinai covenant, one of the most important issues was the theophany. Theophany that was shown to all the people. Theophany was shown. But here what we can see, there is no ritual that would involve all the people. Furthermore, the glory of God is shown not to everybody, but it is shown only to Moses. So he saw the glory of God, and the name of Yahweh was proclaimed only to Moses, not to everybody else. So this is also like an argument for this. And one more argument that we can find here is that God, until the end of the book of Exodus, he continues to use this pronoun you or your people. So he says, this is your people. He never says, this is my people. One more argument that we can find here. So do you see, if people committed a sin, so the only way to restore the covenant is the way of repentance. But we cannot see anywhere in those chapters of the book of Exodus that the people of Israel repented, or they did something to repent. They didn't show any sign of repentance. And one interesting, of course, Septuagint is not an argument for us, but it's interesting how the Septuagint interprets this. And he said, behold, I am making a covenant with you. So if you compare it with the previous one, here he says just, behold, this is the Masoretic text, behold, I am making a covenant, just period. I am making a covenant. But the Septuagint adds this two words, behold, I am making a covenant with you, singular. So it looks like, according to the Septuagint, covenant of Exodus 34 was just a covenant with Moses, with not with everybody else, but only with Moses. And also it's interesting in how it is written in Exodus 34 and verse 27. Write these words, for in accordance with these words, I have made a covenant with you, singular, and with Israel. The Hebrew word order is a little bit different. So in Hebrew, we can read like this: I have made with you, singular, a covenant, and with Israel. So it looks like Israel is an addition to the covenant. And this addition is only because of Moses. So because of his intercession, they are included into the covenant, but of course they are not worthy to be included. And yeah, so what we can say about the covenant of Exodus 34? We cannot say that this is the covenant with the entire nation. It is mostly, we can say this is the covenant with Moses, and this is the beginning of the restoration of the covenant with all the Israelites. And one more interesting fact that we can also find here. So do you see, before people of Israel were afraid of the presence of the Lord. They cannot look at the shining theophany. But what happened here in Exodus 34, we can see Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. So do you see, they are still afraid of the presence of the Lord, of the shining. Even not the presence of the Lord, but this shining that is coming, the reflection of God's glory that is coming from Moses, they were still afraid even of this. So all those facts just tell us that in fact the covenant was not restored in this chapter 34, and it was done a little bit later. Okay, any questions so far?
Prof, please could you kindly go over the various points that you just mentioned?
Again, please.
With regards to the restoration of the covenant. Yeah, please.
So you want to have these points or what?
I'm saying that you just went over something. You talked about why in Exodus 34, we cannot say that this is the covenant being restored.
Okay.
You identify some specific things. I just want you to go over that, what you just talked about.
Okay. First of all, what we can see, that God never called people of Israel my people, never called, until the end of the book of Exodus. So it means if he never uses this phrase, it means that the covenant has not been restored, because do you see, people of Israel are not the people of God. Second argument, he uses a singular pronoun when he speaks about the covenant. So he uses in singular. I will make a covenant with you, singular, not with you, plural, but only with you. Third one, there was no ritual. There was no ritual of the covenant, and that would involve everybody, all the Israelites. And also, the theophany was not shown to everybody as it was at Sinai, but it was shown only to Moses. So it looks like it was the covenant mostly with Moses than with everybody. And finally, what we can say, there was no any sign of repentance from the people. So people are not shown as the people who repented. They didn't bring any sacrifice, any offering. So anything that would testify about the repentance from their side. And finally, we can see that, of course, this argument from the Septuagint can be used, but it cannot be the main argument because it is just an interpretation. It is just the translation. So finally, what we can say, they are still afraid. They are still afraid of God's presence. Even the reflection of God's glory is still scary for them. So all those facts, I believe, can tell us that in fact the covenant was not restored in this chapter. But this is just the beginning of the restoration of the covenant. So God made a covenant with Moses, and later on he will extend this covenant to the entire Israel. Okay?
Yes, please. Thank you, Prof.
Okay. Now, just my suggestion is let us make a short break and we will go to the book of Leviticus.
Okay. Thank
so
you.
10 minutes break. So do you remember how the book of Exodus is called in Hebrew? Anybody remembers? No, nobody remembers the title of the book of Exodus in Hebrew language?
It was called names.
Yes, names, Shemot. Shem is name. So do you remember the son Shem, one of the sons of Noah, Shem? His name actually means name, just name. And Shemot is the plural of names. So this is Shemot, names. The book of Leviticus is called by the first word, and the first word Vayikra. And Vayikra means, and he called. So, and he means God called from the tabernacle, because in the end of the book, we can see that the glory of God descended upon the tabernacle made by the Israelites, and now God is speaking from the tabernacle. And what he's speaking about the sacrifices that were supposed to be brought forth from the people. Rabbis called the book Torat Kohanim, the law of the priests. And this is true that actually it is a kind of not a mistake, but it is called the book of Leviticus. So it is supposed to be about the Levites. But in fact, we can find more instructions about the Levites in the book of Numbers, not in the book of Leviticus. So Rabbi called this book Torat Kohanim, which means the law of the priests. Yes, so how can we have this title, Leviticus? Leviticus comes from the Greek Leviticus and Latin Leviticon. And in the Hellenistic era, the word Levite meant priest. So that is why they called it Leviticus, meaning that it is about the priests. It has some laws of the priests. And after that, this title became very, very, very popular. So the structure of the book can be presented as the chiasm, and we can see that in the very center, there is a Yom Kippur ritual, and this is Leviticus 16. So I believe that this structure is very, very common, and you can find it almost everywhere. Of course, the main theme of the book is holiness, and the word holiness occurs in the book very, very often, about more than 150 times. And the main idea, we can say that God always repeats, "You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine." So this idea is repeated in the book very, very often. There's also what is interesting, that the book, at the time that the book describes, is only 1 month, because in the end of the book of Exodus, we can see the date in the first month of the second year, on the first day, the tabernacle was erected. And the book of Numbers begins on the first day of the second month. So exactly 1 month, the book of Leviticus just described the event that took place during 1 month when the people of Israel stayed at Mount Sinai. Okay, next one. Now let us go to the offerings that are described in this book, and we can find 5 offerings. Chapter 1, from chapter 1 to chapter 5. These are 5 offerings that are described. But the first offering is olah, or burnt offering, and this is the most common offering in the Bible. And also we already spoke about this, that this offering is a kind of universal offering. It can be used at many different occasions, including if a person committed a sin, he can also bring this offering. And the next one is grain offering, or mincha. It is very often brought together with the burnt offering, and sometimes rabbis said that it is like equivalent for the burnt offering for the poorest, but it is not probably, because the burnt offering was a blood offering, and it is unlikely that it was a substitution of the blood offering for the poorest people. So the meaning of the word mincha is gift, and it is very often the meaning is just to bring gift to the God, and very often it is brought together with the burnt offering. The next one offering is a peace offering, zebach shalamim, and this offering was not a mandatory offering. So it means that people can bring it on different occasions, like Thanksgivings, vow, or this was just a free will offering. And the special characteristic of this offering, that the meat of this offering can be consumed by the person who brought it. So part of the meat was given to the priest, and part of the meat was given to the person who brought this offering. Yeah, so this is what we can say about this one. But it was not just a must offering, mandatory offering. It was just an offering that was brought when somebody wants to do something more that is required. And what is important, all 3 of these offerings are described in the Bible as pleasant aroma before the Lord. Pleasant aroma before the Lord. But next to chapter speaks about 2 other offerings, and they are not a pleasing aroma. And when we look at the next passage, chapter 4 and 5, so we can see that it is a separate subsection. So they are different. These offerings are different from everything that was described before. And the phrase "and the Lord spoke to Moses" function in the book of Leviticus as separator. So we can see it in the beginning, 1:1. And now for 1, it says that this is a new section. The new section started here. And the structure of the passage of Leviticus 4 and 5 is different from the previous account. So when we speak about the structure, whereas the earlier chapters are organized around the sacrificial sacrifice, so that the more valuable animals are dealt with before the less expensive. In this chapter, the value of the animals occupies a secondary place. So what I want to say, sorry, this grammar is not good here. So what I want to say is that the value of when we speak about the burnt offering, for example, so in the burnt offering, the bull is described first, and after that, a goat and sheep are described. But when we have the sin offering, for example, the value of the animals is not important, so it has secondary role. But the most important is the status of a person who who committed a sin. And what is important, the sin offering and guilt offering were not known before Sinai. So how do we know that they were not known before Sinai? We already spoke about that the ritual of those offerings required presence of the sanctuary. So if there is no sanctuary, no tabernacle, it is impossible to bring this offering. For example, if the entire nation committed a sin, the blood of the offering should be brought inside the sanctuary. But if there is no sanctuary, this offering is just impossible. So what is the sin offering? The sin offering in Hebrew is chatat, and this word is used for both, for sin and for the sin offering. And there was a very famous study by Jacob Milgrom. By the way, Jacob Milgrom was an author of the commentary in the Anchor Bible Commentary series on the book of Leviticus. So he wrote 2-volume commentary, and this is like a magisterial commentary, one of the maybe the best commentaries on this book. And what is important, Jacob Milgrom doesn't like this term sin offering. And he advocated another name for this offering. He said that this is a purification offering. And why he called this offering a purification offering? Because sometimes this offering was prescribed in the situation which doesn't imply sin. For example, Leviticus chapter 12, and this is the chapter about woman, and that she is supposed to bring a purification offering or sin offering after she gave birth to a child. So do you see, bearing a child is not a sin. So why in this case the sin offering is required? Or for example, when the Nazarite ended his oath in Numbers chapter 6, this offering is also required. But again, so it was not related to sin. So that is why, because there are some examples or some cases when the sin is not in view and this offering is prescribed. Because of that, Jacob Milgrom advocated that it should be called not the sin offering, but the purification offering. But of course, this claim is a little bit controversial. But yeah, by the way, one of our Adventist theologians, Roy Gay, he was a student of Milgrom. He studied under Milgrom, and he also adopted his idea. And for example, if you read his book Cult and Character, so you can find that he advocates the same idea, that it should not be a sin offering, should be called purification offering. But as I said, it is a little bit controversial. Why? Because do you see the first statement here? This word chatat is used for both, for the sin offering and for sin. So anyway, sin offering is somehow related to sin. So we cannot say that it is just only just for purification, but the idea of sin is present in the sin offering, and we cannot deny this. And there is a very important question. So if these two offerings, sin offering and guilt offering, these are chapter 5 and chapter 4, chapter 5, were not known before Sinai. So why do we have them here? So what is the purpose? Why those offerings were introduced at this moment? And as I said, if a person committed a sin, so it looks like it is not a necessary sin offering, because if a person committed a sin, he can just bring the burnt offering, and it would be enough. For example, the good example, the book of Job, when Job brought offerings, burnt offerings for his sons, and he said maybe they committed a sin, and he brought a burnt offering. So it looks like in the case of committing a sin, the burnt offering could be enough. So no need to in one more offering. Yeah, the liberal theologians, they made up a story. They tried also to contribute to this issue, the introduction of the sin offering, and they noticed one interesting thing. So do you see the burnt offering? As you remember, if the burnt offering is offered, it means that everything except skin, everything of this offering, from this offering, should be burnt completely. So nothing remained. What other offerings do we have? Another offering is just peace offering, the Bach Shalamim, but the peace offering was not a mandatory offering. So what the liberal theologians said, that maybe in the cases when people of Israel didn't bring many peace offerings, which was not mandatory, the priests and Levites didn't have meat to eat. So in this case, they introduced a new offering, and this new offering implied that not all the meat should be burnt, but some meat should be eaten by the priest. So that is why they secured food provision for themselves. But of course, this explanation is very liberal, and we cannot agree with this kind of explanation, and we should find something else, another reason for the presence of the sin offering. And the answer to this question can be found in Leviticus 4, verse 2, where the purpose of the sin offering is described. If anyone sins unintentionally in any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done, and does any of one of them, Leviticus 4 and verse 2. So first of all, what I would like to say that this phrase unintentionally is just a little bit misleading, because sometimes people say that this sin offering is just for unintentional sin. But it is not really true, because the term that is used here, beshagaga in Hebrew, actually doesn't mean unintentionally, but most probably we need to translate this one as by mistake, or sometimes we even assume through like human weakness, but it is not necessarily unintentionally. It could be unintentionally, but not necessarily. Because do you see, even if you look at the 10 Commandments, we can see that actually it is very difficult to commit any of the sins, any of the sins that are described there unintentionally. Of course, it is possible to kill a person unintentionally, that you don't want to do this, but it just happened occasionally. But I don't think it is impossible to commit adultery unintentionally, or it is impossible to not be reverent to your parents unintentionally. So it is impossible, most probably, to steal something unintentionally. So you can see that it is very difficult to imply this unintentional term to the sins. So most of the sins that we do it intentionally with a clear consciousness. So we understand that this is a sin, but anyway we do this. So that is why I would like to argue that it is better to translate it: if anyone committed a sin by mistake or due to human weaknesses, something like this. And what is important, in any of the Lord's commandment about things not to be done, and does any of them. So do you see, this verse really connects us to the 10 commandments, and especially this phrase, things not to be done. And this phrase in Hebrew is formulated as a particle law. In Hebrew this is no, and the verb to do in imperfect. And most of the words of the Decalogue, or commandments of the Decalogue, is expressed with the same syntactical formula. So we can say that this phrase, not to do, or things not to be done, is just a reference to the Decalogue. And we understand that the Decalogue is the document of the covenant, so we can assume that the sin offering was provided to atone the violation of the covenant. So if the covenant is broken, so in this case, we can bring the sin offering. So the main idea of the sin offering is to provide a mean to restore the broken covenant. And of course, it is this unintentionally is very, very important. So it means that the person did it due to like human weakness. So he did it not because he wanted to break the covenant completely, but because of our human weakness, we broke the covenant. But we still want to be in relationship with God. So in this case, we can bring this sin offering. This is the main idea, as I believe, of the sin offering. Okay, any questions so far?
Yeah, Pastor, Prof, I have a question here. How you made mention that sometimes the burnt offering can be offered instead of the sin offering. It's the same. I'm just wondering, so what then was the purpose of the burnt offering? I remember that we studied it in the beginning when we were in the book of Genesis when it came up. So what then was the purpose of, if this has to do with mistake due to human weakness, is the burnt offering also attributed to the same thing?
Yeah. So as I said, the burnt offering is a kind of a universal offering. So you can bring the burnt offering at any occasions. I don't want to say that it is a kind of a substitution, because do you see a kind of a duplication of the function we can see here? Because later on, before that, if somebody committed a sin, he just brought a burnt offering and it was enough. But now, after Sinai, we can see that the particular sin offering was introduced, and this sin offering was again, this, as I said, the offering of restoring the covenant relationship between God and the people. But the burnt offering is a kind of a universal offering, so it can be brought on any different occasions. But I don't know, we need maybe to study it more. We need to study it more, especially it would be interesting to study how the burnt offering was used in Israel after Sinai. So, for example, if David brought offerings, what kind of offerings he brought? Okay, but this offering, this particular offering, is done specifically when you committed, when you violated, or when you broke some of the commandments of the Decalogue. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Yes, and it's also interesting that the sin offering was the first offering that was offered by Aaron after he took the high priest office in Leviticus 9. And the guilt offering, Asham, is mostly the same as the sin offering, and the main difference is that the guilt offering required a compensation for the committed sin. And three reasons for bringing this offering: sin against sacred things, violation of the commandments, sin against the neighbor. And now we come to one interesting topic, and this is Leviticus 8. And in Leviticus 8, we can see the ritual of the consecration of the sons of Aaron. So it's a kind of investiture into the priesthood. And yes, one more interesting detail is Aaron is anointed twice. Second time, Leviticus 8:30, Aaron was anointed according to the instructions described in Exodus 29. So this is instruction for the high priest and priests, how they should be invested into his service. But the first time, anointing was done in a special way. He was anointed along with other objects of the tabernacle. So, and here we can see a very interesting idea that the high priest is a part of the furniture. So all the furniture of the tabernacle was anointed, and Aaron, it looks like he is a part of this. So he should be like he is part of the sanctuary, and that is why he is anointed twice. He is supposed to be almost always present in the sanctuary, so he is just like a part of it. And yeah, before anointing, Moses placed on Aaron a turban with the gold medallion engraved with the inscription "Holy to the Lord." Thus, just as the tabernacle and the altar were holy, so Aaron must be holy. He belonged to the tabernacle as one of its holy vessels. So he is like a part of the tabernacle. Yes, and one more thing that I usually ask students to find, but because we do not have enough time, maybe I just will tell you about this. So one thing that we can find very interesting in the description of the ritual of Leviticus 8 and 9, that Moses in Leviticus 8, when he brought a sin offering, he doesn't do everything according to the ritual described in Leviticus 4. And it is really interesting because in Leviticus 4, we can see that Moses described how the sin offering is supposed to be brought. All the details of the sin offering were stipulated here. But when he himself brought the first sin offering in Leviticus 8, he doesn't follow the instructions. And in Leviticus 4, we can see a different, there is a gradation of different sin offerings. For example, if the high priest committed a sin, in this case, the blood of the offering is supposed to be brought into the sanctuary. And we can understand the logic here. Because priest of the high priest is supposed to be an intercessor between God and people. For example, you know very well about the doctrine of the transmission of sin. So what I mean? I mean that if I committed a sin, Jewish people and in Israelites' mind, sin was not something abstract as we today usually understand, but sin was very materialistic. So it means if I committed a sin, it looks like I really have it with myself. And what I need to do, I need to get rid of it. And it is impossible to do it with my own efforts. So what I need to do, I need to bring an offering. And when a person brought an offering, he is supposed to put his hands on the head of the offering. And this ritual of laying hands on the head of the offering was a symbol of transferring sin from myself to the animal. And what happened later on with the animal? So part of the blood was put out into the basement of the altar, and the rest depended on the status of the person who committed a sin. If it was a high priest couldn't, if he committed a sin, he cannot be a mediator or intercessor for himself. So that is why what he did, he took the blood of the offering and sprinkled the blood of the offering against the curtain that divided holy and most holy place. And the curtain is just, how to say, it is just a way how to hide the presence of God. So it means that when he sprinkled blood on the curtain, it was the same as was sprinkling blood on God himself, because God was behind the curtain. And it symbolized that God took this sin on himself from Aaron. So the sin was transferred to God himself. But in case if an ordinary person committed a sin, so in this case, the blood of the offering, sin offering, was not brought inside the sanctuary, but it was just put out into the basement of the altar, and the priest or the high priest was supposed to eat part of the meat of this offering. So in this case, the high priest took upon himself the sin of an ordinary person. So if an ordinary person in the community committed a sin, so the sin was transferred to the high priest, and high priest was bearing those sins until the Yom Kippur ritual. So he took sins of the people upon himself. And of course, this is a clear indication to the office of the heavenly high priest, Jesus Christ, who now who took all our sins upon himself, and he himself is bearing all of our sins. And of course, because he is the perfect high priest, he didn't commit a sin. So that is why the first part of the ritual cannot be applicable to him. But he is wearing sins of all of us. So what happened? I just want to repeat again. If an ordinary person committed a sin, so the high priest was supposed to take this sin upon himself. But if the high priest committed a sin, so in this case, the blood of the offering, high priest cannot take his own sin. So that is why the sin was transferred to God himself, and God took upon himself the sin of the high priest. And the same is true about the entire community. If the entire community committed a sin, in this case, the high priest, because he was also like a part of this community, cannot bear this sin. So in this case, the blood of the offering was also brought into the sanctuary and sprinkled against the curtain. So this is the ritual of the sin offering. So what we can see here in Leviticus chapter 8, Moses doesn't do this thing because the offering that he brought was for the high priest. He was supposed to bring the blood of the sin offering inside the sanctuary. But what he is doing? Verse 14 and on. Then he brought the bull near for the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons. So do you see he presented a bull, and bull was a sin offering for the high priest. And Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the head of the bull for the sin offering. Then Moses slaughtered it, took the blood and applied it with his finger to the horns of the altar on all sides, purifying the altar. He poured out the blood at the base of the altar and consecrated it so that atonement can be made on it. Moses took all the fat on the entrails and fatty lobe of the liver and the 2 kidneys with their fat, and he burnt them on the altar. He burnt the bull with its hide, flesh, and waste outside the camp as the Lord had commanded Moses. So according to the rules, according to the prescriptions, Moses was supposed to bring the blood of this offering inside the sanctuary, but he didn't do this. And somebody can say, okay, but in this case, Aaron and his sons were not invested, so they have not been the priest yet. So that is why they're not supposed to be, the blood was not supposed to be brought inside the sanctuary. But what is interesting, when we look at the ritual in chapter 9, in chapter 8, it is clear that Aaron and his sons were invested already. So they, in the end of the ritual, they became priests. Okay, there is another question, but it is not related to our class, so let me explain it later about Saul. Okay, so now in chapter 9, what we can see here in chapter 9, Aaron is already a priest, and his sons are already the priests. But what they do, they bring offering for themselves, a bull again. Let me read it. Verse 8. So Aaron approached the altar and slaughtered the calf as a sin offering for himself. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and applied it to the horns of the altar. He poured out the blood at the base of the altar. He burned the fat, the kidneys, and the fatty lobe of the liver from the sin offering on the altar, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He burnt the flesh and the hide outside the camp. So he did the same as Moses had done before. He didn't bring the blood of the sin offering inside the sanctuary as he's supposed to do. And what is interesting, verse 15, the offering for the people. Aaron presented the people's offering. He took the male goat for the people's sin offering, slaughtered it, and made a sin offering with it as he did before. He presented the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to the regulation. Next, he presented the grain offering, took a handful of it. Yes, and verse 18, finally, he slaughtered the ox and the ram as the people's fellowship sacrifice. And again, when he brought the offerings for the people, he didn't bring it, the blood, inside the sanctuary. So it means that for some reason, Moses and Aaron just deviated from the prescriptions given in chapter 4 of the book of Leviticus. And now there is a question why. Yes, Pastor Chipulu, I saw you raise up your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Prof. I just wanted to appreciate, Professor, the relationship between the Levites, the tribe of Levi, who were earlier assigned to take care of the sanctuary services, and the sons of Aaron here. Where do we see the link between the two groups that were assigned or tasked to take care of the sanctuary services? The people, the tribe of Levi, and also the sons of Aaron. Where is the link?
What do you mean about the link? So do you see Levites were given a special part after the sin of the golden calf, because they were the first who came up to Moses and who stand on the God's side. So that is
Yes.
why God said that I will give you a special function in the among the people of God. So after that, we can see that in this chapter, God invested Aaron and Moses as the priests. And the rest of the book of Leviticus is just the law about the priest, what kind of rituals, what they should do, and everything about that. But
so that
the Levites, the investiture of the Levites is described in the book of Numbers in chapter 8. By the way, do you see Leviticus 8 and Numbers 8 are similar? And we will speak about the Levites a little bit later when we speak about the book of Numbers.
Okay. No, then I'll appreciate it more when we get to the book of Numbers, because the two groups seem to be playing the same role, the sons of Aaron and also the tribe of Levi.
Not
so
the
it's
same.
there.
The role was a little bit different, not a bit different. So, and we will see it exactly when we speak about Numbers 8 and Numbers 18, when their role is described. So the Levites are given as helpers for the priests. So the priests play the main role, but the Levites are just helpers, supporters of the priest service, of the service of the priest. But we will see it later on.
And I want to believe, Prof, that both the Levites and also the sons of Aaron, both of them benefited from the tithe that people gave. They were all beneficiaries of tithe.
Yes. Both of them were supposed to get tithe, and they lived because of tithe. But the problem that we will see later on in the Bible, that tithe was not always brought, and in this case it was a big danger for the Levites, because the Levites were supposed to find another means for survival. And do you remember the story in the book of Judges, when the Levite is walking around to find something, a job for himself, because he didn't have land, he cannot walk on the land. So he found the Micah house, and the last one suggested for him to be a priest in his house. And later on, the tribe of Dan took him with themselves, and they suggested him to be a priest in the entire tribe. Of course, it is not written in the book of in the Pentateuch, so it's against the Pentateuch. But what happened? What exactly happened when people stopped bringing tithe and offerings? So the Levites were not any means for survival, and it was a problem in the later periods of the history. Okay, so let us continue. So there is a question. So why did Moses and Aaron, why did they not follow the instruction of Leviticus 4 when they brought sacrifice for themselves and sacrifice for the people? Because in Leviticus 9, Aaron is already a priest, a high priest. So he is supposed to fulfill everything according to the law, but he doesn't do one important thing. He doesn't bring the blood of the offering inside the sanctuary. So do you have any idea why it happened like this? Okay, so we will not lose time. Actually, the answer to this question we can find in the end of the book of Exodus. That is why I say that these two books are really very close connected, and sometimes it's difficult to make a division between them. The book of Exodus ends with this statement. I read from verse 34. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. So the answer is very, very simple. And nobody, even Moses, was not able to enter the tent of tabernacle. Nobody was not able to enter. So the tabernacle was here, the sin offering was brought, but the problem was that nobody was able to enter the tabernacle. And that is why Moses and Aaron do everything according to Leviticus 4 until the moment when they need to bring the blood inside the sanctuary. So this is just a very, very simple answer to this question, but it tells us something about the tabernacle, and it tells us something about the system that is supposed to work right now in Israel. So it looks like tabernacle is not functioning yet as it's supposed to do. So tabernacle is not working, and it is not working because the covenant has not been restored yet. So yes, I just mentioned it. After that, for the first time, yes, for the first time, Moses and Aaron entered the tabernacle only after the first sacrifices are offered. In Leviticus 9 and verses 23, and Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting, and when they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. So, okay, what does it tell us, this passage? So they were not able to enter, but now, after the first sin offering for the people was offered, they were able for the first time to enter the tabernacle. And it just tells us that the covenant at this moment was restored. So the covenant was not restored in Exodus 34, but it was finally restored in Leviticus chapter 9. And do you see what is written after that? The glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. And what is amazing, do you remember, before, when people saw the glory of the Lord, they were afraid of it. But verse 24 says, here, fire came from the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell face down. So it looks like for the first time, they were not afraid of the presence of the Lord, but when the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people, they shouted from joy and they worshipped God. So do you see what we have in Leviticus 9? In Leviticus 9, the sin offering was offered. And as we said before, the sin offering was just for the restoration of the covenant. So as soon as the covenant was restored, the tabernacle is functioning now. Moses and Aaron can enter the tabernacle, and they, for the first time, they are not afraid because they see the glory of the Lord. So what we can say that Leviticus 9 is actually the ritual of the restoration of the covenant. And we can find many interesting parallels between Exodus 24, and do you remember that Exodus 24 is actually the ritual of the first covenant, Sinai covenant, and Leviticus 9. For example, God calls Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu with Moses and the 70 elders. And Leviticus 9, Moses called for Aaron, his sons, and 70 elders, so almost the same. After that, we have preparation for the ritual. After that, we have, and there is some differences. and I will explain it a little bit later. Moses and everyone else ascended the mountain, and we can see that Moses and Aaron entered the tabernacle. God's glory is shown to Moses and to those who came with him, and God's glory is shown to all the people. And we have the reaction to the God's glory. They saw God and they ate and drank. And reaction number one, the fire from the Lord consumed the offering. All people are worshipped God with the joy. Leviticus 9:24. And
Please, you are muted.
No, muted, Prof.
Prof, you are muted.
yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't understand. I just accidentally muted myself. So here we have a second reaction, and we have both reaction here in Leviticus chapter 9. So it was reaction number one is positive reaction, and reaction number two is negative reaction. And here we have the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain. And for the Nadab and Abihu, who brought a foreign fire, this fire was a consuming fire, and it consumed both of them. So do you see this is reaction two is negative reaction, and reaction one is a positive reaction. But all those parallels just can be used as a proof that Leviticus 9 is a restoration, is a ritual of the restoration of the covenant. So what we can see that the covenant finally was restored, and now the covenant is functioning, and people are not afraid of the glory of God. And what is also important, in chapter 11, for the first time after the golden calf, we can see that God called the people my people. So before that, we have never seen this expression before chapter 11 in the book of Leviticus, and only in chapter 11 we can see that God called people, you are my people. So all this is evidence, all these are evidence for the restoration of the covenant. So any questions? Yes, I can see there are two raised hands. David Anochi, please go ahead.
Yes, Prof. Just on a lighter note, I want to just clear this. The offering where the high priest is allowed or can eat part of the offering, does that mean whoever becomes the high priest cannot be a vegetarian?
Yes.
And is it optional that he can eat it, or it is compulsory?
It's compulsory. So he must eat the meat of the offerings. Of course, he was not supposed to eat a lot, and he was supposed to eat a boiled meat. So it was not tasty meat, like something that is roasted or something like that, but it was just a boiled meat that was most probably not very tasty, and he had to eat this boiled meat. And of course, he was not supposed to eat a lot, just portion of this boiled meat. But yeah, it's true, the high priest was not a vegetarian at that time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Prof.
Yes.
What if the priest was vegetarian and when he takes that piece, he vomits? What can happen?
I don't know. So do you see at that time most probably people were not vegetarians. Most of them were not vegetarians. So at least what we can see in the Bible, like Abraham, and do you see all the patriarchs, they were shepherds. And I believe it was very difficult to be vegetarians, to be shepherds and to be vegetarians. Okay, Pastor Banda.
Prof, I am just thinking in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 24, where there is this fire that comes from the presence of God and consumes the offering. Could we connect this to the very idea of Genesis 15, where God is fulfilling the covenant, and in the restoration, he himself like passes through the animal?
Okay, now we will come to this question. Thank you very much for this question, because yeah, now our next task is to see on this covenant, the covenant that was done. And I just want to suggest you to compare it with the first covenant that was given to the people in Exodus 19. So can we find any difference between these two covenants? Yes. Also, this fire from the Lord. And when we speak about the fire from the Lord, we can see that there are several occasions when the fire from the Lord was coming. The occasion that is very, very close to us is the passage is written in 1 Kings chapter 18, and this is the Elijah sacrifice. And what is interesting, that Elijah also builds an altar from 12 stones, and it looks like the story of Elijah alludes to both stories, to stories in Exodus 24 and Exodus and Leviticus 9. So I remember I read one article, I do not refer to it, but there was one lady who made a research on this, and he published an article, and he argues that actually what Elijah did in 1 Kings chapter 18, it was also a restoration of the covenant. And the story of Elijah alludes to both, to chapter 24 of the book of Exodus and to chapter 9 of the book of Leviticus. So it could be also one more argument that the covenant was restored finally in Leviticus chapter 9. In Leviticus chapter 9. Yes, so we can see some arguments why we can see that Leviticus 9 is the ritual of the renewal of the covenant. So now let us compare the covenant of Leviticus 9 with the covenant in Exodus 19. So if you compare the promises of the covenant, what we can see, the royal priesthood, people were promised to be, everybody was to be the royal priesthood. But in fact, it didn't fulfill now in this covenant. So we have priests, we have Levites, and we have other people. And there is no priesthood for the entire nation anymore so far. So now we can see that this promise was not fulfilled, and they didn't have the royal priesthood of the entire nation. And yeah, it is clearly seen from the Numbers 18, and this is exactly about the Levites. So the Levites shall keep guard over you and over the whole tent, but shall not come near to the vessels of the sanctuary or to the altar, lest they and you die. They shall join you and keep guard over the tent of meeting for all the sacrifice service of the tent, and no outsider shall come near you. So it means what the Levites are supposed to do, they're supposed to guard the sanctuary so that nobody else can approach it, but only the priests. So it means that we have priests, we have Levites, but we cannot speak about the royal priesthood for the entire nation. So the same we can say about the holy people. And we can say that there was also one very interesting dissertation on this, and it was published as a monograph, and it was called Graded Holiness. So what we can see that the holiness is, we have the maximum holiness in the center of the camp where the tabernacle is. This is the most holy place, and after that the holiness is diminishing when we go to the extreme of the camp, and outside the camp we have of course the common place or impure place where all the impure things should be brought. So priests have a greater degree of holiness than the Levites, and the Levites in turn have a greater degree of holiness than the ordinary people. So we can see this as a kind of graded holiness, but we cannot say that all the people is a holy nation. Furthermore, in the book of Leviticus chapter 16 and verse 16, God said that I am dwelling among the impurities of the sons of Israel. So it means that we cannot speak about the holy nation anymore. And what is also important, and it was like a kind of a degradation of the covenant, if we can speak like this. The way of communication with God was also changed. So if we can say that before everybody was supposed to be a priest and could have like a direct access to God, now they have this system of sacrifice and system of tabernacle in order to approach God. And now let us remember the story of Abraham. So do remember I said to you that you need to pay attention to this slide, because here the life of Abraham is described like this. So in the beginning we have a covenant, and it was a covenant of faith, but in the end we have that because of lack of trust in God, Abraham committed a sin and he broke the covenant, and the covenant was restored in Genesis 17. But this covenant that was restored here is not the same as the first covenant of Genesis 15. After that, we can see that Abraham again showed lack of faith, and finally his covenant, the original covenant, was restored on the Mount Moriah, when he offered his son as a sacrifice. So, and I told you that this kind of pattern we can find later on in the history of Israel as nation, and it means that Abraham is a kind of how to say, symbol or antitype of Israel as a nation. So what we have a covenant, Exodus 19, and this is the covenant of royal priesthood, of the holy nation, and direct communication with God. But after that, we can see the golden calf. People committed a sin, and the covenant was restored. And Exodus 34 to Leviticus 9 is a kind of a restoration of the covenant. But this new covenant was not the same, or was not of the same quality as the first covenant. So it's like a permanent, I mean, temporary. It's like a temporary thing before the covenant should be restored to the original one. So, any questions so far? And okay, so because of the lack of time, let us make a short break now, and the rest of the presentation you can just read yourself, and I just want to go to the book of Numbers. if you don't mind.
Okay, before we go,
Yes.
I just want to ask this question, maybe to digress a little bit. Talking about the degree of holiness of the priest, the Levites, can we link that with, I haven't read much of Catholicism, but does it have something to do with what the Catholics are practicing?
Yeah, so Catholics and Orthodox as well, what they did, they actually copied the Old Testament system, the system of the Hebrew Bible. They copied it into the church. And they don't have this doctrine of the priesthood of all believers. So according to the Catholics, they still have priests, and those priests are kind of mediators between God and the people. And that is why they of course take the foundation for it from the Old Testament. But we will see, and I hope I will be able to demonstrate it to you that it is a wrong idea. And I hope tomorrow, when we finish this course, you will see how this idea of the covenant that was promised in Exodus 19, but the covenant that deteriorated, and it deteriorated only because of human side. So it looks, do you see, what we see here? We see here that the covenant, the original covenant in Exodus 19, was not the same as the covenant that was restored in Leviticus 9. So the promises are not the same, and some other issues are not the same. And finally, you will see that it will deteriorate even more in the book of Deuteronomy. So in the book of Deuteronomy, the covenant of the book of Deuteronomy even more different from the original covenant that was promised in Exodus 19. And I believe that this is exactly what in the New Testament called Old Covenant or Old Testament. Because do you see, one of the issues why I was very much interested in the idea of the covenant is the question about God. So because usually the very primitive understanding of the covenant and all the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament, especially among the evangelicals, what they say that the Old Testament and everything that is written in the Old Testament is old covenant, the covenant that cannot save. And we now live in the era of the new covenant, and the new covenant is much better than the old one. And the old covenant is just for Jews, and we live in the era of the new covenant, which is for everybody. But it looks like this kind of logic presents God in a wrong light. Because do you see what happened at Sinai? God called his people, and actually he said, I love you, and I want to make a covenant with you. But it appeared that the covenant that God made with Israel later on became obsolete, became deficient, and the new covenant was needed. And if you look at the covenant from this perspective, it means either God experimenting, and he says, okay, I have this covenant, but later on he says, okay, I have a better covenant. Or he's a liar. He lies to his people because he said, I love you, I want you to be in the covenant. But this covenant is not the best covenant that he can suggest to them. And later on he said, I have the better covenant for you. So do you see, I don't believe it is like this. I don't believe that God is experimenting with different kind of covenants, okay? this covenant didn't work, I have another one. I believe that from the very beginning in Exodus 19, God suggested to the people the best covenant, the best relationship that could be. But because of human weaknesses, because of human sinfulness, this covenant was changed and it became the old covenant. The covenant that actually is done not to really save, but just because the first covenant was violated, and the first covenant should be restored one day. Okay, I hope you will see it later on.
Thank you.
Prof, can I ask?
Yes, please. Of course.
Going through the issue of the offerings and then what Moses did with Aaron and then his sons and the rest. My question is, I've not seen it though, but I'm wondering, did Moses ever bring any of those offerings?
What do you mean?
After that, did Moses offer any offering?
Afterwards.
After this, yes. What about the children? What about Aaron and the rest of the people, especially the priests? And yes, is there any record or anything? And what happens if they sin? Were they supposed to do that? Were they supposed to go through the same process?
If I understand you correctly, Moses functions in the book of Exodus and in the book of Leviticus as a high priest, as a mediator between people and God. So he is really a high priest. But later on, when Aaron was invested into the high priesthood, so he became a high priest, Moses just became a mediator of the covenant, but now the high priest is Aaron is the high priest. And later on, I don't remember, but it seems to me after that, Moses didn't bring any sacrifice, but everything was done by Aaron himself. Even before, when the covenant is done in Exodus 24, we can see that Moses is the one who offered sacrifices. So he is doing sacrifice. He is functioning as a high priest. But after that, we can see that he just gave all those responsibilities to Aaron, and he doesn't function as a high priest, but he is just a mediator of the covenant, as a prophet, mostly as a prophet, we can say. So, but it looks like I didn't understand your question well. So can you just, I'm sure that I...
Yeah, I was just wondering whether Moses ever brought burnt offering or sin offering for himself.
Oh, for himself?
Yes. And what about the case of the high priest, that is now Aaron? Did he also do that? Because yes, they were doing it. They were high priest for the people. He was the mediator for the people.
Yeah, this is a good question.
Yeah, but did he? Because I can see the first reference. Yeah, but what about the subsequent time?
No, it looks like he didn't bring a sacrifice for himself. Yeah, and we can explain it because actually he was the only one who didn't commit a sin. He committed a sin, but he committed a sin only later in Numbers chapter 15. In Numbers chapter 15, he committed a sin. But before that, or 20, or no, chapter 20, he committed a sin. But before that, we cannot see anything that he committed a sin. So now he is presented as a person of faith who is faithful, and even all the Israelites committed a sin. He's the only one who didn't do this. So maybe that is why we cannot see that the sin offering is described here for Moses, only for the Aaron and the people of Israel.
Prof, I get that one. And then what about his brother himself, Aaron? Because I believe that after this particular incident that we are looking here at Leviticus 9 and beyond, I'm looking at the fact that even though they were high priests and even though Moses was the mediator, as human beings, they might have sinned along the line. Now, and so in that sense, I was wondering whether Aaron would have sinned either mistakenly or unintentionally, and would he have to come with a burnt offering or with a sin offering to offer for himself? And is he the one to have done it himself, or somebody else would have done it for him?
Yes, so do you see, after the inauguration of the sanctuary, everything should work like it is described in Leviticus chapter from 1 to 5. So all the offerings were described there. And of course, Aaron is described and all his sons are described as just sinners, and most probably they committed sins, but we don't have the records in the Bible how it was done. But according to the procedure, if the high priest committed a sin, he should bring the bull offering for himself. And of course, he cannot be a mediator in this case. So in this case, the blood of the offering was taken into the sanctuary.
Okay. All right, thanks, Pastor. I was just trying to draw an analogy that there is this, I think there's this Bible quotation, touch not the anointed of God. And then sometimes in our church, you find incidences where some people feel they are above what is expected of all of us. I'm taking the case so that when it comes to the person, not me, it's for the rest of the people. So it just trying to understand it that look, Aaron was given an assignment, but he himself was subject to those rules and regulations regarding the burnt offering and the sin offering and the rest. If any of them sins, they go through the same process. They were not exonerated because they were high priests or because they have been selected in order to do a particular role.
Everybody is liable to the law that is now given. Everybody, including Moses himself.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Okay.
Okay, let us make a break, and in 10 minutes we'll come back. Okay, and I continue recording now. So we are now in the book of Numbers, and as I said, this is a very interesting book, but this is a sad book because this is a book of rebellion. It describes rebellion in among the people of the Lord. So the title of the book again comes from the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, it is referred to as a book of arithmoi, and arithmoi is Numbers, and it was called Numbers due to two census, which are described in Numbers 1:4 and Numbers 20:26. But the Hebrew title of the book is Bamidbar, and Bamidbar just simply means in the wilderness. Though not chosen for the purpose, the Hebrew title in the wilderness would be far more suitable, since the wilderness is the scene of the greater part of the book. So yes, of course, the Hebrew title in this case would be much better than the Greek title. So this book actually describes wandering in the desert, and we can see that everything just happened somewhere here at Sinai Peninsula. So of course we don't know the place of the Mount Sinai, exact place, but it is just maybe it was here. By the way, today if you go to Egypt, especially to Sharm el-Sheikh, and they will suggest you a trip to Sinai, to Mount Sinai. Most probably this is not the real Mount Sinai, but because nobody knows exactly where the true Mount Sinai was. And here they were just wandering in the desert for 40 years, and after that they came to Canaan from the east. So the first attempt was from the south, but it was unsuccessful. And after that, they came to conquer Canaan from the east. And when we speak about the chronology of the book of Numbers, we can see that first 11 chapters, first 10 chapters up to 10, 11, just describe how they were at the Mount Sinai. So they're still at Mount Sinai. And after that, they departed from Mount Sinai and they arrived at Kadesh. And this is the first month of 40th year. And after that, we have death of Miriam. And after that, the death of Aaron. And finally, departure for Moab. So these are the dates that are mentioned in the book of Numbers. And what is surprising, not surprising, but what do we have? We have the dates in the beginning, so when they're still at Sinai, and after that they are almost in the end of the journey, and no events inside or between these two extremes or ends of the story are not mentioned. So we don't have dates for the events that happened in between. Okay, so the structure of the book. So there are several ways how to arrange the structure. It could be arranged geographically, like first 10 chapters is in the wilderness of Sinai. From chapter 10 to 22, the road in the wilderness from Sinai to the plains of Moab. And starting from chapter 22, they are already on the plains of Moab. So this is one possible division. Or we can say also a thematic division. So chapter 1 to 10, the layout of the Israelite camp and the beginning of their march. Chapters 11 to 14, the march and complaints. 15, 19 episodes from the long period of wandering. 20, 25, the march to the land of Canaan and the conquest in Transjordan. And final chapters, the preparation for the conquest and settling in Canaan. But I would like to prefer this structure of the book. It's very concise, it's very easy to understand, and it explains the structure or the content of the book very well. So some scholars say that in the first 10 chapters, Israel is portrayed as an ideal Israel. So these are the first 10 chapters of the book. And after that, we have rebellious Israel, and from chapter 10 to chapter 25. And after that, we have new Israel, chapter 26 up to chapter 36. And let us accept this division, and we just follow this division of the book. So we have some important repetitions of the book. Like in the book, like we have one census and we have the second census, and we have some other things that are repeated, but I don't want to pay attention very much to that. Let us go to the ideal Israel. So the first 10 chapters of the book portray Israel as an ideal nation. So why are they portrayed as ideal nation? Because first of all, Israel is depicted as blessed by God. This is evidenced by census. Now Israel is a great nation, as it was promised to the patriarchs. Israel is described as a well-organized society, in the center of which is the tabernacle of the Lord, and the Lord is present among them. All people who have impurity are sent out of the camp. Heads of all generations make voluntary donations to the tabernacle. The Levites are dedicated. The Israelites celebrated Passover. The Israelites described as being God in everything. So we can see that the first 10 chapters portray Israel as really an ideal nation. So while they are at the Mount Sinai, they are ideal nation. They are obeying God and doing everything according to God's instructions. And they have an order, everything is okay, and it's really ideal nation. So this is the way how they placed the camp, and we can see that everything is arranged again. And what is also interesting, that they are arranged according to the families. I mean, to Leah and Rachel, for example, we can see at the west part, these are mostly, not mostly, everybody is descendants of Rachel. Yeah, if we look here, so here at the east part, the descendants of Leah. And here also the descendants of the south, descendants of Leah. And here we have the sons of Rachel, maid servant, Dan, Asher, Dan and Naphtali. And here we have sons of Judah and sons, sons of Leah. So they are arranged like this. But what we have here, we can see that the Levites, so the priests are have their tents at the east, at the entrance to the tabernacle, and the Levites are just surrounding the tabernacle. So the Levites are portrayed really like a special god, special military, not military, but special service, that their task is just to protect the tabernacle from any foreigner, and they just have this privileged position in the society. So when we look at chapter 1 and chapter 2 and 3 in the book of Numbers, we can see that several tribes are given a special place in census. And you must probably already know what these tribes are. Of course, this is the tribe of Judah. This is the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim and Joseph. And this is the tribe of Levites. So sons of Joseph, highlighted by being placed in the center of chiasm in Numbers 1, 5 to 15. And this chiasm is shown here. So we can see that 5 tribes, Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, 5 tribes, Benjamin, Dan, Asher, Gad, Naphtali. And in the beginning, in verse 10, we can see 2 sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. So they're emphasized as being in the center of the chiasm. And it is clear, we remember from the book of Genesis, there is a kind of a rivalry between Joseph and Judah, who will be the next heir of the blessed. And we can see that this kind of idea is continued in the following books. And we see that the tribe of Joseph, the sons of Joseph, are highlighted somehow. But the tribe of Judah is also highlighted in this story, is just singled out, because this is the largest tribe, and they have the privileged position. Their tents are very close to the entrance to the tabernacle. And of course, one more tribe that is emphasized is the tribe of Levi. The Levites replaced the firstborn, and they have a special status in the society. So what we can say about the Levites, that the Levites are portrayed as the nation inside a nation. First of all, what we need to remember, that the tribe of Levi is not counted with the rest of the tribes. So it is not the part of the census, and they have a separate census. So it looks like we have everybody else and the tribe of Levite. The Levite are exempted from the military service, because in the military service, only those who are 20 years and more. Okay, just if we read Numbers chapter 1 and verse 3. You and Aaron are to register those who are 20 years old or more by their military divisions, everyone who can serve in Israel's army. And so the first census was exactly a military census, so to see how many people are ready to be soldiers, are ready to fight. So this is the first census, but the Levites were not counted among all other tribes, so that is why they are exempted from the military service. But we cannot say that they are completely exempted from the military service, because we read already Numbers 18, and according to Numbers 18, they were also military people, but their task was not to participate in a war, but their task was just to guard, to protect the tabernacle from any foreign penetration. So nobody was supposed to approach tabernacle, and they should defend it. So that is why we cannot say that they are completely exempted from the military service, but they are not a part of the regular army. The tribe of Levite was given special place in the camp, and we saw it here, so that they just surrounded the tabernacle. The tents were just around the tabernacle. And they also replaced the firstborns, so that is why they are also emphasized. And about the Levites, it said that they belong to God. And that is why we can say that the tribe of Levites is a kind of a nation inside a nation, or people within a people. And that is why we can say that they have a privileged position. And as I said earlier, the book of Numbers is actually the book about Levites, because here we have a lot of references to this tribe, and regulations about their work and their life. And what is also interesting when we speak about the dedication of the Levites, that the ritual has a number of similarities and number of differences with the ceremony of the consecration of the priests. What is the most important difference is that the priests were sanctified, so they were put in the area of holiness, but the Levites were cleansed. So if the priests are holy, the Levites are pure. So priests were introduced into the sphere of holiness, and the Levites into the sphere of purity. So this is the difference between them. And the priests are holy, but the Levites just are pure, and they're supposed to keep this purity. And the Levites had to be sprinkled with the cleansing water, and the priests, we remember, had to be sprinkled with the blood. And they should completely shave their bodies and wash their clothes. This ritual to find a series of parallels with the washing with the water from the ashes of the red calf. And shaving was necessary for the Nazarites. And shaving was also necessary for lepers when cleansed of leprosy, that they were symbolically cleansed of all ceremonial impurities in order to perform the service in the sanctuary. So it's again emphasizes the idea of purity. They are supposed to be completely pure, totally pure from all kind of impurities. And one more interesting detail about the consecration of the Levites. Do you see we have some really interesting details here. So the hands of the whole society of the people of Israel were laid on the Levites. So let me read this verse. Verse 8 and 9. Chapter 8 and verse 10, sorry. Then present the Levites before the Lord, and have the Israelites lay their hands on them. And this idea of laying of hands on the Levites is really very, very interesting, because do you see, the hands were laid upon the sacrificial animals. And this is the only case where the hands were laid upon the sacrificial animals. And we can also find some other parallels with the offering, between the offering and the dedication of the Levites. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
yes.
We have the word consecration, and this word consecration in the description of the consecration of the dedication of the Levites is the word tenufa. And this word tenufa actually means wave offering. And what does it mean, wave offering? So do you remember when the first fruits of the field was gathered? They were presented to the Lord as the wave offering. So the Levites substituted the firstborns in Israel. And that is why they are also described as tenufa. So they are like a wave offering. So these several connections allow us to say that the Levites are described as a living offering or living sacrifice. And actually it reminds us the words of Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 12 and verses 1 and 2, when he said that you should be, we as believers should be a living offering or living sacrifice to the Lord. And sometimes people are just confused about that. So what does it mean to be a living offering? Because we know that the sacrifices or all the offering system of the Old Testament was based on the death of the sacrificial animal. But here it is like kind of an oxymoron when he said that living offering. And most probably Paul, when he spoke about the living offering, he made a reference to the Levites. So he actually says that we need to be like Levites. All believers are the Levites, are those one who serve the sanctuary, those who serve the tabernacle. Yes, Pastor Ntunga.
Excuse me, sir. My question is this. We said the Roman Catholics kept the old system of priesthood, while the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches the priesthood of all believers. Now, how do we strike the balance? Because it's as if, since all of us are priests in the new covenant, we have no respect for pastors. How do we strike the balance in the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Yeah.
Levites were special people. Are pastors special people? How do we look at it?
Yeah. So do you see this is the doctrine of that was refreshed by the Reformation? Because during the medieval period, we can see that the Catholic Church introduced its own doctrine about this stratification, so that they made a division between how they call it, lay people and
the clergy.
Clergy, yes, clergy and the lay people. And actually, when the Reformation started, the first thing, not the first thing, but what they did, they tried to eliminate this difference between lay people and the clergy. So we don't have clergy, and it doesn't matter what rank or what status do we have in the church, ordained pastor. So all of us are royal priesthood, and I believe that this is a very, very important doctrine of the priesthood of all believers, because even the initiatives that our church is doing right now, like total members involvement. So why do we have total members involvement? because unfortunately, many church members understand our church in the Catholic sense. So we have pastors who is a clergy who is supposed to do the job of the church, and we are just parishioners. So we just come and participate during our services and go home, and we are not involved very much in the life of the church. So that is why I believe that this doctrine of the priesthood of all believers is very, very important. And we need to emphasize to our people that all of us are royal priesthood, all of us, without any difference. So if we believe in Jesus, we have a direct access to the heavenly sanctuary. So we are the priests, Levites of the heavenly sanctuary. But I agree with you, Pastor Ntunga, that the prestige or the respect to pastors is not the same as it was earlier, maybe. And if we just eliminate all the distinction between just lay people or lay members and pastors, in this case, the pastors are not respected very much. But on the other hand, I don't know, but we need to support the respect to the pastors, but not because creating some barriers between the church members, or to make a distinction between the church members and the pastors. Maybe we need to find some other way how we can support pastors and how we can return the respect to this profession, to this service among the church members. And I believe that the best thing that we can do in this case is to give a good education to our pastors, so that the pastor could be highly respected person, pastor who performs his duty very professionally, I mean very dedicated, very committed to the service. I believe such people will be always very much respected. And when we speak about the pastors, it is better to say that he is the first among the equal. Then he is, of course, he is a leader. He is supposed to be a leader, but not because he has a special status or special privilege in heavenly hierarchy. Okay, I hope I answered your question.
Answer it, sir. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Levites, as I said, this is a nation inside a nation. And Levites are also like a living sacrifice. So they are introduced into the sphere of purity. And they have this privileged position among all other people. And here, just several words about chapter 5 of the book of Numbers, and this is chapter about, it is called Sotah or Deal, and this is about a wife, about a husband who suspected his wife some infidelity, or that his wife committed a sexual sin or something like this. And sometimes people say that this chapter is out of order here, because do you see, before we had something about census, about Levites, about the Nazarites, but here in between we have this Sotah or Deal. And many questions arise in regarding the purpose of this ritual. And the problem is, if the woman is found guilty, why is she not put to death in accordance with the law? Because if a woman committed an adultery, she is supposed to be stoned. But she is not supposed to be stoned in this case, but she is just, if she is found guilty, she It says that she will be barren or something like that. And according to the law, both adulterers and adulterer should be put to death. But in the Sota ordeal, there is nothing said about a man who was involved in a sin of adultery. So what is the main purpose of this ritual, and why is it placed in this context? What words and terms are the most frequent in this passage? And the most important terms are jealousy, unfaithful, and curse. And the context of this ritual, chapter 5, number 6, verse 6, when a man or woman commits any of these sins that people commit by breaking faith with the Lord, and that person realizes this guilt. The phrase Elim O Ma'al Badonai is syntactically very similar to the phrase Ma'ala Bo Ma'al. And the context of this ritual, or what we can find here, is connected to Exodus 32, the golden calf incident. The Sota ritual reminds about the incident with the golden calf. God is very often described as jealous. And the next story is about the vow of the Nazarites, which is followed by the priestly blessing. So we can say that this Sota ritual is just like a symbolic action that reminds about how it is important to be faithful to God. But I just don't want to speak very much about that one. But I would like to pay your attention to the Nazarite vow, which is described in Numbers chapter 6. And when we speak about the Nazarite vow, so do you remember what kind of restrictions Nazarites have? So they couldn't shave their head, and also they couldn't touch the dead bodies. And the last one, they shouldn't drink any alcohol. So when we compare the style of life of the Nazarite, it is clear that the Nazarites, their lifestyle is very clear to the lifestyle of the priests, and even not just a priest, but a high priest. So only the high priest was not allowed to touch the dead bodies. At any circumstances, he was not supposed to touch the dead bodies. And Nazarites, their head was a kind of a symbol of holiness. Their head, they are not supposed to shave their head. And when we speak about the high priest, he has this tablet on the head, the most holy, and he was also, his head was a center of holiness, or the most holy place, I mean. So it is also similar. And also the high priest was not supposed to drink any alcohol, because he was always in the tabernacle, and he was not supposed to take any alcohol. So it means the Nazarite vow is the style of life of the Nazarites is very similar to the style of life of the high priest. And here we can make some important conclusion from that. So do you see, when God said that God promised every Israelite to be a royal priesthood, but later on, because of human sin, we can see that they made a covenant, and in this covenant, only the sons of Aaron could be priests in the society, and everybody else is not able to be priest. But the Lord gave an opportunity to everybody, including women, because the Nazarite vow can be given by everybody, including women as well. So God gave an opportunity to everybody to live a life of the high priest. So it means that now, after the covenant is done, nobody could be a priest, nobody except the sons of Aaron. But if somebody wants to live a lifestyle of the priests, he can do this by this Nazarite vow. And so what I said, the high priest, the style of life of Nazarites was very similar to the style of life of the high priest. So this, by keeping the Nazarite vow, every Israelite could practice the same lifestyle as the priest. So in this case, we can say that by giving this vow, the Israelites can be part of these priestly blessings. They cannot be the priests, but they can imitate the life of style of the priests. Okay, any questions so far?
Yeah, Prof, let me just ask this. Let me find out whether there is any relation with this. In the book of Judges 11, we read about the daughter of Jephthah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the vow that she took, does it have any relation with this Nazarite vow?
No, she didn't. Her vow.
Yes.
And let me remember. She said that she will mourn for her virginity. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it is related to the Nazarite vow.
No.
I don't think it is related.
Okay.
Yes, and this is one thing. Another thing that I want to add about that. So do you see the book of Judges is another very sad book in the Bible because it shows like a downward spiral of human or Israelites degradation as a nation. And every next judge was it was like also deterioration in every next judge. And we can see that at that time when even Jephthah gave this vow, it was completely not in accordance with the Pentateuch, so with the law of God. So we can see that at that time they actually didn't follow God's law very closely. So that is why this is also one of the reasons why I don't think it is a Nazarite vow. And there is no indication in the text that it could be a Nazarite vow. It is just she spent some times with some other girls, and they just mourn about her virginity, so that she will die without any progeny, without any descendants. Yeah. Okay, and anything else? Yeah.
Let me add another one.
Yes.
Now, these are two things. The first one has to do with Samson.
Mm-hmm.
Because of what happened, and his hair was cut and the rest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, at that point, there was, to me, it looks more like he has somehow negated his role as a Nazarite.
Of course.
All right.
And yeah, the story is very fascinating story about Samson. And when we read the story, it is clear that he is always working on the edge. So what I mean, do you see he of course, the Bible doesn't tell us explicitly, but for example, he as a Nazarite was not supposed to touch the dead bodies. And do you remember when he married for the first time, and they asked him to bring, and they asked him to bring those change of clothes or just clothes, what he did. He killed some of the Philistines and took the clothes from them. So in order to do this, in order to take the clothes from the dead man, he was supposed to touch the dead body, okay? And even the Bible doesn't tell us explicitly that he did it. It looks like he is always at the edge of this violating the Nazarite vow. Or for example, when he made this feast, and the word that is used for the feast is, if I'm not mistaken, mishteh, and mishteh is from the root shata, to drink. So it was not just a feast, a wedding feast, but it was the feast with the alcohol drinks. And although the Bible doesn't say that he drank alcohol, but it looks like he's always about to violate this Nazarite vow. And finally, when his hair was cut, and so it was clear that he is not a Nazarite anymore. Yeah, so, but he is, we can say that he is actually a symbol of Israel, because as I said, the book of Judges is a very sad book because it describes this degradation of the people and of their system. And actually he is a kind of a symbol of Israel that is not able to serve God properly and loses this Nazarite privileges. There is a question, can someone be born naturally as Nazarite, or a person so decides on his own and take the vow? So the only case when we can see the Nazarite from the from birth was John the Baptist, or Samson as well. Yeah, Samson as well. But do you see, they were Nazarites? How can we say that from the birth? It was God's will that they should be Nazarites from the birth. So they should live the life of Nazarites from the very beginning. But usually it was, of course, the choice of a person. So the person can make the choice to be a Nazarite. It is only in case of Samson and in case of John the Baptist, we can see that they were, it looks like they were Nazarites. But about everybody else, it is just, and it is very difficult, I believe, to keep this lifestyle from the birth, especially in ancient Israel, and when you are just a small boy. But I believe it is possible, but it needs some personal efforts to keep this lifestyle. Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Prof. I was asking this issue of not touching the dead bodies. In that time, it was like contamination. Would that still apply to the pastors today, that they cannot be able to touch or the dead body? Can it still have the same implication?
Yeah. So do you see, you touch a question, and it is very, very important question. And let me address it right now, because I believe there are many misunderstandings in this question, especially not only in this question, but there is one more question that is more important. And this more important question is about what laws from the Pentateuch are supposed to be kept by us Christians or Adventists, and what laws are obsolete and should not be kept anymore. And the standard approach that many people use for this question is just to make a division into moral laws and ritual laws. Or sometimes they also say there are moral laws, there are civil laws, and there are ritual laws in the Pentateuch. For example, if somebody committed a sin and he is supposed to be stoned, this is a kind of a civil law, and because the state of Israel, I mean, doesn't exist anymore, so and we do not part of the state of Israel, we are not supposed to keep this kind of law. Or ritual laws, because these ritual laws were just for the Israelites, and we are not supposed to keep them, so it is not obligatory for us. And what is obligatory for us is just a moral law, and that's all. This is a very interesting approach, but there are several objections to that approach. And objection number one, if we read the Pentateuch, we can see that there is no a division between different types of law. So in the Pentateuch, we cannot find any difference between the law about Sabbath and the ritual laws, so they are of the same significance. For example, if you open Leviticus chapter 19, and this is also like a code or like a collection of different laws, so those laws are just mixed up. So you can find there laws about from the Decalogue and laws from ritual laws, and they are together. And it looks like the Bible itself doesn't make any difference between those laws. Also, what we can say for the Jewish people, they just understand Torah as the entire Pentateuch. So what is the law? This is Pentateuch. So everything which is written as Pentateuch is Torah, is the law. So that is why this is one reason why we cannot make a difference between them. And another reason, it is just, I will speak as an Adventist. So do you see there are some laws that cannot be classified as moral laws, but we still keep them. And the easiest example is the law about the clean and unclean food. So why do we keep this law? Why we do not eat pork or some other unclean food? Of course, sometimes people try to say that that this law is a kind of a moral law, but it's very difficult to prove that the law about the food is a moral law. So it is related somehow to moral. So it's very difficult to prove. So in this case, we have this question, we as Adventists, why do we keep the law of the book of Leviticus chapter 11? So it's much easier to say this is a kind of a ceremonial law or ritual law, and we are not obliged to do it anymore, as many evangelicals do. So that is why I would like to suggest another solution for this problem. And I believe, and of course you can agree with me or you cannot agree with me, but I believe that every law that was given, or every commandment that was given in the Pentateuch, has its rationale. So what it means? It means that God gave the law not just to restrict people or to make their life difficult by keeping all those prescriptions, but he did it on purpose. So every commandment, everything that is written in the Pentateuch or in the Bible has its rationale. And it was not just given arbitrary, but it was given on purpose. And if we, and second, my understanding of the laws of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, is that every law that is written in the Pentateuch is still, how to say, I don't want to say is still obligatory for all of us, but is still valid. I would say like this, it's still valid. Because if God is the God of wisdom and he gave the laws, and those laws, of course, they can be different in different cultures, but there was something important in every law that was given by God. So how can we approach the ideas of laws? I will give you the example. So for example, ceremonial laws. why can we say that they are still valid for us today? Look, what I want to say the following. Of course, okay, I just want to approach from a different perspective. So when we look at the 10 Commandments, we can see that Jesus expressed the 10 Commandments or integrated them in 2 commandments. So he said, love God, and this is the first commandment. And the second one is love your neighbor. So it looks like the 10 Commandments is just decoding of these 2 commandments or detailization of these 2 commandments. So what we say, we can say the same about every other law in this in the Pentateuch. So every law has a principle, and this principle is eternal. So this principle can be expressed differently in different cultures, in different times, but the principle remains the same. I will give you the example, the ceremonial law. Why I say that this law is still valid for us. Of course, we do not offer sacrifices. But what was the principle of the ceremonial law? If I committed a sin, so in this case, somebody should die for my sin. So this is the principle. And I believe that this principle is applicable to every person at every time. Of course, it doesn't mean that I need to bring a sacrifice today, because the perfect sacrifice has been brought already, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But the principle still remains, and it is applicable to me. So when we look at the laws of the Old Testament, what I believe we need to do, we need to find this principle, which is eternal, which is applicable to every situation, to every culture. And we can take this principle and we can look how we can use it and how we can fulfill it in our culture, in our time. So I can bring you another, give you another example. Do you remember there is a law about wearing a cloth from different material? So you cannot, according to the law, you cannot wear the clothes of different type of threads or different kinds of material. And many people ask the question, so shall we keep this law or not? And in fact, nobody of us is keeping the law, because if you take any shot, so you can find there different kinds of materials, because nowadays nobody is keeping this law. But let us try to understand what is this law about. So it says that we, of course, we shouldn't use different types of thread or different types of fabric in our clothes. But very interesting, we can find very interesting twist here, because it was not an absolute prohibition. And the only person who was allowed to wear such kind of a dress, such kind of cloth, was a priest. And in this case, we can find another or high priest. So in this case, we can find another application of this law. So most probably when in the Old Testament, and the Bible says that the Israelites should not wear this kind of cloth, it means that they should not pretend or claim to be the high priest. They should not pretend to on the role of the high priest. And in this case, this law has a very different, could have very different application for us, because it means that we shouldn't take the role of the high priest in our modern situation. And for example, when the Catholic Church claims that they have priests and they have a high priest in the church, and this high priest is Pope, in this case, we can say that they really violate this law. They pretend or they claim that a pope is the high priest, but we have the only high priest, and our high priest is Jesus Christ. And by taking the place of Jesus Christ, he is violating this kind of law. So what I would like to say that every law has the principle. So God didn't prohibit ancient people to touch dead bodies just to restrict them and to make their life more difficult. But it was done on purpose. So we need to understand why it was prohibited, and we can see how we need to apply this law for us in our modern situation. I was sorry for the long explanation, but I hope I answered your question. And I saw somebody else raised up a hand, but after that loaded down. So please, yeah, Pastor Banda. Oh, I didn't hear you very well.
I'm saying in your explanation, you covered what I wanted to ask.
Okay, and so Pastor Tunga, I see you raised up your hand.
It was, I forgot bringing down the
okay.
hand. Okay.
Okay. So any other questions? Okay, if we don't have questions now, I believe that we can stop for today.